Hello everybody, my name is Dave Bernier and today we are now addressing the design pattern number 6 from the book of Antonio Gulli's Agentic Design Patterns. So pattern number 6 is planning. This pattern can seem quite simple in concept, but in implementation there are some small things we might not think at first when we think about planning. There's nothing very complex when from the top of your head, what is planning? So you have a goal, you have to split it in different steps, and then you execute the steps. But there are some smaller things where you want to be able that you define what is a success for every single steps. You want to be able to reduce some of the steps. Maybe you want to go back on the drawing board and readapt your plan. And the design and the planning design pattern is actually addressing this kind of reality about planning. There is one sentence that I really liked in the book that described very well what I think is the planning design pattern. So here, the author says that this structured approach transforms a simple reactive agent into a strategic executor that can proactively work towards a complex objective and even adapts its plan if necessary. So here, what we can understand is first that the planning pattern compared to the other patterns that we learned previously, now we are not in reaction mode, but we are now a bit more strategic. And this is one very important point that combined with the proactivity of the strategy is what brings strength and interesting use case, or why this design pattern can be quite relevant in different situations. When we see the strategic executor, that says that we do have someone that is proactive with the proactivity right after. There's an executor and it adapts the plan if necessary. So we have a judge here. So in that pattern, we are kind of combining some different patterns that we learned in the first 5 chapters. Now, the pros and the cons of that pattern. I'm going to start with the cons here because they are kind of the same from one pattern after the other, because we kind of add complexity, we add some LLM calls, we add some processing there because we want to make it more solid, but there is a price to pay for that. And the cons are what they are: latency, cost, context explosion, and complexity. These are going to come back almost every time because you do add some ingredients into a bigger bowl or a bigger recipe, and it takes more time in the flow to be able to execute all of that. So the latency will mainly come from, in this case, the extra step that is the planning. The fact that we might have to loop back into go back to the drawing board to the planning steps because we want to improve it. We can loop back to every single step if they are not well defined. Well, we do have a judge that is going to tell the executor, hey, you did a bad job, go back, try again, you missed this, that, and a third point or whatever. So this adds a lot of latency, and by extension, it's going to increase the cost because of the extra tokens being used, and even the processing and computing power of running all these requests or queries. And then the context explosion is quite related to the first pattern with the prompt chaining, because we are going to inject into every single step, we're going to inject the context and the results of the previous steps. Now here, we're only addressing some sequential steps. We're not going to go into parallel steps, which could be achieved, but you would need an extra orchestrator to make sure to join back everything at the end. And the idea here of learning the concept is mainly to understand that we do have a planner first, and then we have an executor that is going to do every single steps, and we can reflect on every single steps and the whole plan. Now the pros. Well, the pros are mainly why this pattern exists and why we can not we can but why we use it. It's because it allows addressing a high level goal and decompose it in small specific tasks or goals. So that allows for more specializations for every single task and allows the different LLM calls or LLMs used to go deeper and very more on a concrete and precise subject. It does allow for some better handling of complex or non-deterministic or multi-step tasks. Here, the non-deterministic is very important. The fact that we might not know what are the steps in advance make the planning pattern very, very interesting because the agent is going to take the job to specify what are the steps. But there is a drawback, and like we saw with the cons here. So that's why if you already know what are the steps, don't use the planning pattern because it's going to just add some uncertainty, some variation in outputs, and some extra cost, extra latency. So in a production environment, if you already know what are the steps in the flow, just use a workflow or parallel executions or sequential, whatever you need, because you know you already know what needs to be done. So don't ask an LLM what will be the steps here. Then it allows approaching each step with more control and details than trying to approach everything all at once. I don't know about you, but personally, if I try to do everything, if I have a project that I want to complete and I don't take time to plan and I want to do everything at once, well, I'm gonna either hit some roadblock, miss some detail that I could have identified first, or just be completely lost and do a very less well job or good job than I would have if I took time to plan and define what are the steps. So it's kind of the same as in project management or in a project definition, except that here it's mainly determining what are the tasks and execute them instead of having all the management around. Then it adds the ability to refine the plans based on the execution results. So here, like I talked earlier with the adaptation up there, it's kind of the reflection pattern here. And what's nice, like we'll see in the flow a bit after, is that we can reflect on every single execution of every single steps, and we can reflect on the plan itself. So what does it look like in an N8N flow? So here it's not necessarily a very big flow here. Why? Because you do have a call to plan, a bigger loop for every single steps that starts here and goes. Oh, you don't see my mouse, right? Okay, so oops, I'm gonna move that. So here you start the loop, it goes through the execution, the judge, and then it goes back to go and increment and get the next steps. And it does that as long as there are steps or as long as there are errors or the criteria are not satisfied. In an actual environment, production environment, you would have a few more things like a circuit breaker because you want to be able to stop executing so it's not running for 12 hours and consuming hundreds or thousands of dollars of tokens just because you're stuck in an infinite loop. So avoid that. You need a circuit breaker. Also, you can add a lot more tracing and logging and debugging just to make sure that you can improve and use evals to be able to improve and validate the actual prompts and results of every single steps here. Now let's go to the first step. Oh, also, as always, I'm using the chat here to be able to prompt and trigger the flow. It's not necessarily always required, but there we need to have a way to specify or ask something to the agent with the planning pattern. So I'm going to use the chat here just to be able to trigger it easily. First step, the plan, what it does. So the planning stage, the planning step is mainly used to clarify the goal, to split it into tasks. I'm going to go a bit lower in the list here. It's also going to define some success criteria. It's going to try to define those, but if we know them in advance, it's going to be better. But the success criteria can be on the overall plan, and they can be applied to every single steps also. And the more precise it is, the more precise the output will be, and the judge will be able to do a better job. Then it's going to add a description for every single steps, and stay with me here, because we can split all these steps into a different calls to have a bit more specialized output. We could even parallelize some of them, as long as we can keep the context. Here I'm asking the LLM to do it all at once. It might not always be the best case. And then there is the dependency mapping, because the step might not all have the same dependency. So step 2 can depend on step 1, but maybe step 3 could be independent. We don't know, depending on what we ask the agent. So there is somewhere in the flow, here I'm doing it at the same time in the planning stage, but somewhere we have to define which steps depends on the other ones, because we could have, for example, an orchestrator that makes sure that everything runs smoothly. In our case, every single steps are going to be executed sequentially, so step 1, step 2, step 3, and we are injecting the context of everything that has been executed and validated. And we are injecting them back into every single step execution. Now, the second step or second stage of our flow is to loop through each step. Here, a bit more innate and details. I'm not using the loop node because I want to increment some variables. So here, if we look at here, we have a context variable. So every single time I'm either using the context or I'm starting an object. But if we go back into the loop in reverse, the post loop item here, the context, I am actually appending the output of every single step. So this allows me to inject the context to the next step execution. And with the looping node, it's not as straightforward, in my opinion, to be able to do it this way. But it does require us to keep track of the index of which step we are. Then, for every single step, we both execute, then judge. The execution is actually having the prompt of the planner for the current step. So we do add the description, we add the expected output, the constraint, the tool hint. We didn't address that, but the planner has knowledge of which tools are available in the system, and it can hint the executor to use tool A, tool B, or tool C. Here I only have two tools, a web search tool with a SERP API and a calculate tool, which is mainly a small code that execute a mathematical equation specified in a string. It's mainly to have an example of having different tools to test the tool hinting process here. So that's it for the executor. And then if the judge decides or determines that it's not respecting the requirements, we do inject them also in the prompt here. And it has a memory just to be sure that it knows what it did before and what needs to be done now. Then the judge, it's kind of the same thing as the reflection pattern, so I invite you to go and watch that video. But here what I added is some different reason to loop. So if there is an execution lapse or a tool that has an error or well, these are the two cases. So if it's not answering the requirements or it failed in any way to execute the step, we go back to the step here and try to execute it again, and we ask the judge to explain why it's not answering the requirements. Then there are two other cases here where if the plan is not clear enough, maybe the step didn't have some specification clear enough, and the executor was thrown into a direction that does not at all answer the needs, then the judge can send the flow back to the drawing board using, if we look at those two output, we are going back here. I set a failure report variable, and the planner is going to use them to be able to start, not necessarily from scratch, but we can starting from the steps that failed and adapt the plan either on the description or maybe the subsequent steps. Then it does that as long as a step does not fit the requirements. That's why you do need a circuit breaker in an actual workflow. Here I can just press stop when it's running, when I see that it's been 25 times that it's doing the same execution, and hopefully I catch it before getting there. Then, as in my other videos, I'm using the respond to chat node just to be able to log and see what's being done. But usually we kind of increment the context so the next step is aware of what has been done, and we keep going that way. So here, let's try with an actual query and test our agent here. All right, so generate a marketing plan for an agentic development company specialized in chatbots or virtual characters. All right, so we do have the planner running at the moment. If we go look at the expected output of the planners here, let's look at the prompt itself. There are some planning rules. We want to make sure that it either react to the failure report, but we want to make sure that it had constraint, tool hint, and the output format. Here in the output, we want to have a goal, some global criterias, the steps, and each step has an ID, a title, description, maybe some tools, an expected output, and some constraint. Here in that case, we specified minimum number of words, if it has to include some citations or some specific strings or words or subjects. Table or table columns because we're formatting it probably in Markdown or HTML. If we want to display, let's say, a comparison, well, the planner wants to be able to specify what it needs. This can be very different on different use cases. Here I'm having a more generic agent, but depending on your use case, that can be completely different here. Then the delta here is mainly when we have a failure report and we have to go back to the drawing board. It's going to say, okay, I did replan depending on the type of error, which step ID has been triggered, has been triggering the replan and why, and then what we did change, well, what it did change for the in the replanning. So here the output for the marketing plan. Specialized in chatbots or virtual characters. Success condition. Marketing plans cover market analysis, target audience, marketing strategies, budgets, and timeline. The plan is clear, actionable, and tailored to the specialized field. Nice. So the first step here, step 1, conduct market analysis. So I guess it's going to use, the search web tool. Then step 2, define target audience. Must include demographics, industries, user personas, and a definition of the step and the expected output. Then we have to develop marketing strategies. Then the estimate the budget, so it's probably going to use the calculate tool. Nice. The marketing timelines, we're now at step 5. Step 6, compile the marketing plan. And that's pretty much it. All right, so are we still running? No, we're done. Let's have a look at the judge here. Did it need to loop? No, so I guess the executor either did a good job or the judge did a bad job. Here I have an error in my calculate tool, so I'm curious. I'm gonna have to debug that. But yeah, so we didn't need to, the judge was not useful here, but if required, it would have gone back to the execution steps. So let's look at what we got, sorry, as an output here. All right, so for the market analysis, so what did we have? Rapid growth on the market, increasing customers, key competitors, interesting, LivePerson, ServiceNow, CarStar AI, okay, mainly chatbots here, dynamic character AI alternative, interesting, some market trends with some numbers. And here I didn't ask to have some sources, so that could be a criteria that we want to enforce in the prompt of the planner to make sure the executor do it. And here, this is a very generic planner or planning pattern. In your use case, you might have to give access, I don't know, to some company knowledge to be able to maybe direct some customer request or so analyze some customer feedback. You might want to give access to some database, and the planner can have a bit more context to what's actually needed. Because here I did do something quite generic. Oh, but we do have sources here. Good. Then the target audience, industries, user personas, marketing strategies. I would be actually curious to read that. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. We might have to have it validated by an actual marketer. But here that's still quite interesting to have some different LLM calls, split that into some actual steps and make sure that it answers a need. Here we have the tables with different milestones with a plan from month 1 to month 6. And yeah, so that's kind of a good idea. Some redaction, it's always interesting to be able to decompose the actual redaction steps, and having a planner, an LLM being able to split that and to define the different step is a very powerful, or can be a very powerful pattern to implement when you don't have a deterministic flow and you don't know the required steps in advance. So that's it. Thanks.